The What to Next podcast helps you build a TBR of future favorite books. In each episode, Lori and Maine interviews authors and book influencers to recommend books they loved for you to pick up today. If you're an avid reader, always looking for your next great read, then the show. Hi, Sam. Welcome to What to Next podcast.
Hi, hello. Thank you for having me.
So happy to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a full-time romance author. I live in central Kentucky with 3 of my dogs, and that is basically my entire life, wrapped in like 2 sentences.
Yeah.
So that's me, my dogs and romance.
So what led you to start writing romance? What was the seed of inspiration? Where did it start?
So I have a degree in creative writing English. I have a bachelor's degree in that. So my intent with getting that in the first place was that eventually I would publish a book. And I didn't know how I was going to get to that point in my life, and I didn't have any plans on how. And so I was working in HR, actually. I was a recruiter when COVID hit, and I had just started reading romance, like adult romance novels, like the year before COVID hit. Mm-hmm. So I was a little bit late to the game. I'd been reading YA mostly like my entire life. So when I switched over, I fell in love with the genre and read, I think probably from like July to the end of that year, I had read over 200 adult romance novels. So I was like, okay, so this is what I've been missing. And so COVID hit and I got laid off from the HR job. So I decided to just go ahead and take the plunge and took my own spin at writing a romance novel, and the rest was history.
Oh my gosh, I love this. I have to tell you, I had a similar experience. I discovered romance. I was reading YA, reading whatever was popular for a long time. And in 2016, someone told me about BookTube, something randomly, there's a community of people to talk about books. And I discovered a new adult list. And from that new adult list, from the month of May till December, I read 200 books, 270 something books. It was that's all I did. I was I loved it. I was consumed. It was just this is what I've been waiting for.
Yes, exactly. It was just this whole world that got opened up that no one, and at that time I think I had started actually reading Jennifer L. Armentrout, so I loved her YA stuff. I think If There's No Tomorrow is one of my favorite books of all time. And so I happened upon her pen name, I think J. Lynn.
Yep, I read that series too.
So that was where I started, and then I was okay, and then I just kept going and going and going, and then it just spiraled from there. So it was just I had never, I guess, realized that the indie online, the romance community even existed. So, and then I unlocked it, and I just have not been able to leave since. So
achievement unlocked. I had a similar experience with pandemic and transitions and jobs and stuff like that. I moved before the pandemic, 2 weeks before the pandemic. I moved to Chicago, and I had all these recruiter meetings and all these interviews, and then pandemic shut down and everything shut down. I was unemployed for quite a few months, and I ended up getting my story is I ended up getting hired back to my old job. But that was luck. But at the same time, it was such a shift. A pandemic basically shifted what your life was going to look like in the past, pre-2019 and then post-2020. And I'm glad that you discovered, you're you know what, maybe I'm just going to use my degree and write some books.
I will never be able to the gratitude I have, COVID was such a traumatic experience for, the entire world. And I'm very grateful that I had some resources and stuff that allowed me to explore self-publishing and indie publishing and stuff, so that I could go after what I really, really wanted to do with my life when I had that offer. And it was scary because it was I don't know if I'm gonna make any and I'm not I'm not extroverted at all. So having to sell myself and sell my books and all this stuff, I had a little bit of marketing background just from college. I had started as a marketing major and then switched over to English. So I had a little bit like of knowledge, and I grew up on social media. So that aspect of it wasn't that like daunting, but having to learn the ins and outs of the industry and having to figure out how to sell myself and how to make money off of this hobby that it was a hobby for most of my life. Yeah, it was just a monumental shift, but definitely not what I would have expected. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, yeah, the future would have looked very, very different.
Mm-hmm. I love this. All right, let's talk about liars and liaisons. What is the elevator pitch?
The elevator pitch is basically there's this grumpy, unhinged music professor who has taken to his family's mountainside estate because he's being haunted by his past. And he wants revenge on his family for some stuff that they did to the people in his life. And he decides to get his revenge by pursuing his brother's ex-girlfriend. And then the love ensues.
Love ensues. There will be happily after. Where there will be just kind of like
exactly.
a little taboo, a little forbidden, and a whole lot of romance.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's talk about like books that you recommend. Like, which books will you recommend our listeners to pick up?
So I have actually not read anything in such a long time that like. I read the first book that I think I've read this year that was like a brand new book to me was Contempt by Ashley Zavarelli, who I absolutely adore. I will read anything that she puts out. And it's like a musician, angsty. It's not dark, but it's darkish. Like it's got some darker themes and stuff. Kind of, well, I don't want to spoil anything, so I won't give it out any more tropes because there's like secrets and lies and stuff like that. Which if you know anything about me and the books that I write, like especially with the second book in my Monsters and Musicians series, which is Vipers and Virtuosos, musicians, secrets, lies, like revenge, all that stuff is my jam. That's like the template for that book. So I ate Contempt up. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. I loved it so much. It made me cry. So that's the last book that I read. Before that, I think I fell into fantasy at the end of last year and read the entire ACOTAR series, but I read them completely out of order because of the way TikTok kept showing me stuff about the books. I fell in love with Cassian and Nesta like before I had even read them. Okay. So when I went to read the books, I went to the middle of the third book. Is that
A Court of Winds and Theory or Mist and Fury?
Well, is that the third book where the big like
Winds and Theory? A Court of Winds and Ruin, I think it is.
Yes. So I went to the middle of that one. And had to figure out what was going on there and spoiled that for myself. And then from there, I went to A Court of Silver Flames, which has since became my absolute favorite. And I think I've read that probably like 20 times since I first, I reread it constantly. So yeah.
Oh my God. I have not read A Silver Flames. I started it and then I was just like I was not in the fantasy mood. Like I need to get in the fantasy mood. But I remember reading ACOTAR like when it came out in 2016 because that was a big reading year, and so I remember reading that and like being stuck in Akamath, like A Court of Mist and Fury, and the cliffhanger ending, and having to wait a whole year.
I didn't want to start the series even knowing like now it's got 5 books in it or 5 point whatever. I didn't even want to start it because I was like, it's not complete, so I'm scared of what is to come. I don't want to get attached to these characters and have, Sarah ruin my entire life if she decides to, kill off some or whatever. So I didn't want to, but TikTok kept showing me. So I was like, okay, I just gotta do it. So yeah, I can't imagine having to wait after ACOTAR, like the first book. I can't imagine that.
Yeah. I was like, I read ACOTAR and ACOMAF back to back. Like I was in a trip, I was like in a solo trip in Europe, and I would be like, and then the end of ACOMAF, I was like, no, you have to make me wait. And then like, and, this is before TikTok. This is like Instagram was there, but like, this was like we're searching on Instagram, like who's there to give us like updates,
Yeah.
Like I'm like, what is happening? And she was also working on Throne of Glass, and so there was like the other series, and I was like, but we need the series. We need a competition. So I love this. Sav, tell us where we can find you online.
Online, I am pretty much everywhere, which makes me sound kind of creepy, but I am on Facebook. You can search Savar Miller. Instagram, I think my handle on there is like SRM author. Mm-hmm. My handle, I try to keep it similar, but like I think there's already an author Sav R Miller. There might even be like a Sav R Miller on Instagram already. So I'm like, okay, well it's not even my real, like none of that's for my real name. Sav is part of my real name, but like Miller is not my last name. So I'm like, that's really rude of you to have this name. This name that I have made up. I'm on TikTok, author Sav R Miller, Pinterest, Twitter, author Sav, I think, for both of those. So I'm pretty much everywhere. And then I've got my website also, which is just savrmiller.com.
Awesome. So, thank you, Sav, for being in the show.
No problem. Thank you for having me. This was fun.
If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share with friends, subscribe, rate, and review the show. This is the easiest way to support the podcast. For a list of books mentioned and other book recommendations, please visit whattoreadnextblog.com. Thank you so much for listening and happy reading.